Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Your Neighbor on the Left, the podcast about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, your opinionated host. Today we're going to be talking about Canada's liberal comeback, presidential approval ratings, seeking truth at a Trump golf course, DEI at the Smithsonian Institute, and the social media misinformation campaign against due process. For this week's deep dive, we're going to go headfirst into the concepts of authoritarianism and fascism and see what we can glean about their place in today's USA. So that's quite a laundry list of interesting things to talk about. So let's jump right in, and we'll start off with the Canadian elections. If you're following the news, you'll note that Mark Carney, the Liberal Party candidate, has been elected as the next Prime Minister of Canada in the elections that were held on April 28th. When it was all said and done, the Liberals ended up with 169 seats compared to the Conservatives' 144. Now, in Canada, you need 172 seats for a pure majority. So the Liberals did not get the pure majority, which means they'll have to try and get support on various things from one of the other three minor parties in order to get some things done. But the bigger news story here is the Liberal comeback in Canada. If you were to look at polls that were done late 2024, or actually right up until the new year, the Liberal Party had been behind the Conservative Party in polling by about 24 points. 44% for Conservatives, 20% for Liberals, and then the rest spread across the other parties. And then something happened in January. We inaugurated Donald Trump. Donald Trump came into office and, among other things, immediately started talking about how Canada would be the 51st state, how we were going to slap tariffs on them because they had spent years screwing us over with a terrible trade deal. A trade deal, by the way, that was done by Donald Trump in his first term in office. And as this rhetoric continued to build, so did the Liberal support in the polls. And by the time we got to April 15th, they had switched places. And the Liberal Party then polled at 44%, and the Conservative at just a hair over 37%. So it's not really a stretch to say that the Liberal victory in Canada was handed to them by our president. One thing that can't be argued is that the subject of the trade war with the U.S. and all the rhetoric coming from our administration, particularly the items about making Canada the 51st state, were the major issue in this election. And in the end, the Canadian voters decided that the Liberal Party is the best one to combat our rather conservative administration and deal with what they decided is the most important topic of the day. On the morning of the election, President Trump went to his Truth Social account and sent out the following message. Good luck to the great people of Canada. Elect the man who has the strength and wisdom to cut your taxes in half, increase your military power for free to the highest level in the world. Have your car, steel, aluminum, lumber, energy, and all other businesses quadruple in size with zero tariffs or taxes if Canada becomes the cherished 51st state of the United States of America. No more artificially drawn line from many years ago. Look how beautiful this landmass would be. Free access, No border, all positives with no negatives. It was meant to be. America can no longer subsidize Canada with hundreds of billions of dollars per year that we have been spending in the past. It makes no sense unless Canada is a state. It's worth noting that the conservative candidate, Pierre Poilievre, was in no more in favor of Canada becoming the 51st state than the Liberal candidate was. However, it appears that the electorate from Canada decided that the last thing they needed at this juncture was a conservative prime minister or a conservative majority in their legislature. And it seems clear that Trump, for his part, wasn't really backing the conservative candidate either, because that Truth Social post that I just read to you makes it sound like he wanted Canadians to vote for him, which I guess isn't all that much of a surprise coming from our current president. Trump has even made jokes recently after the death of Pope Francis that he would make a good pope, reinforced by goofy Lindsey Graham, who posted a tongue-in-cheek tweet about how Trump would make a wonderful pope. And I guess, listen, when you think of all the things that Donald Trump has said over the years, all the ridiculous lies, and many of which are easily provable to be false, would anyone be surprised if he decided to say that he's actually been a Catholic cardinal all this time, and that he's the best cardinal, and he knows more about cardinal than anybody else, and he is the perfect choice to be the next pope? So, I'm thinking maybe he could be a write-in candidate as prime minister in Canada. Doesn't seem like all that far of a stretch. I suppose it would be fair to say that Canada is a rather liberal country. I believe this is the fourth consecutive election where a liberal prime minister has been put into office. But the crazy rhetoric and the trade war that Trump initiated certainly did not bode well for a conservative party that just a few months ago seemed poised to take over in Canada. And speaking of who's popular and who's not, polls have been released in the last week or so, a number of them actually, that all have the president's approval rating hovering somewhere around the 40% point. The pundits on the left are quick to point out that this is the lowest approval rating for a president at or about the 100-day mark since they started tracking such things about 80 years ago. Even the Fox poll, the poll that Fox News published, had pretty abysmal ratings for Trump across the board. The one positive is border security. 55% of the people polled think that he's doing a good job where border security is concerned, which makes sense. The border crossings have dropped dramatically down to next to nothing since he's taken office. But unfortunately for President Trump, every other category in the Fox poll, inflation, tariffs, taxes, the economy, foreign policy, guns, deportation, immigration, and overall job performance, he's got much more people disapproving than approving. Now, as far as President Trump is concerned, this is all fake news. He took to Truth Social on this topic as well and said the following. Great pollster John McLaughlin, one of the most highly respected in the industry, has just stated that the failing New York Times poll, the ABC Washington Post poll, about a person named Donald J. Trump, me, are fake polls from fake news organizations. The New York Times has only 37% Trump 2024 voters, and the ABC Washington Post poll has only 34% Trump voters. Unheard of numbers unless you're looking for a negative result, which they are. These people should be investigated for election fraud. And add in the Fox News pollster while you're at it. They are negative criminals who apologize to their subscribers and readers after I win elections big. Much bigger than their poll showed I would win. Lose a lot of credibility. We'll assume he meant lose a lot of credibility. And then go on cheating and lying for the next cycle, only worse. They suffer from Trump derangement syndrome, and there is nothing that anyone or anything can do about it. They are sick. Almost only write negative stories about me, no matter how well I'm doing. 99% at the border, best number ever, and are truly the enemy of the people. I wish them well, but will continue to fight to make America great again. There's a whole lot to unpack there. First of all, he's basically saying every poll where he's negative is a fake poll, including Fox News. And he's citing John McLaughlin, who is a pollster who worked with his campaign. I don't know if John McLaughlin actually stated that the polls were fake or if he's just extrapolating from some conversation with McLaughlin where he said that Mr. President, you're actually very popular. And in the one thing that my reading these social media posts loses in an audio podcast is you can't see the crazy capitalization and punctuation that he uses. You'll never, ever mistake a Donald Trump social media post for one that's written by someone on the communications staff. They are like night and day. And then he goes on, to say that they all suffer from Trump derangement syndrome, and they write negative stories about me no matter how well I'm doing. And keep in mind that he's including Fox News in this statement, at least in this social media post, which, that's unhinged enough to be delusional. The negative poll numbers that Fox announced are pretty much the only negative thing that comes out of Fox about Donald Trump, except for maybe some folks who haven't been jumping up and down with joy over his tariff policies. And it's hard to say where Donald Trump is concerned if he truly believes that he's more popular than these polls put out, or if this is just part of the way to deal with it, to say that they're fake. I know that, in the week leading up to these polls being released, he was focused intermittently on some rather odd things. I mean, there was a story about how he is erecting 2 giant flagpoles to the right and left of the White House. I guess because the giant flagpole on top of the White House isn't enough. He was asked at one point when he was going to the funeral of Pope Francis why he thought it was important to attend the funeral, and his answer was that it was important because he did really well with the Catholics in the election. He won the Catholics, and that's the first time that's ever happened, I believe, which, of course, it's not. I mean, in every election, somebody gets more of the Catholic vote than the other person, so I'm not exactly even sure what he was talking about there. But he tends to focus on some really odd things a good portion of the time. His continued insistence that tariffs don't work the way they actually work, I think is a big deal for people. We're hearing all sorts of negative things coming out. There was a information released from, I believe it was both Walmart and Target, about how because of specifically the part of the tariff policy that deals with China and the crazy high tariffs and China's unwillingness to capitulate, that we could be seeing shelves that are empty for certain things in the coming weeks because, tariffs, whoever pays for the tariffs, not even withstanding, even though we know it's us, the products won't be coming in. And there are news stories about how ships are coming in from China empty because though we're sending things there, they're not shipping things out. And people were worried about workers at ports being laid off because there's less work. And there was a news story that came out on the 29th about how, reporter asked Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, on the 29th about a story that had come out that Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, that they were going to do a addition to pages where the product was affected by tariffs and essentially put a number on the page to let customers know how much higher the product was being priced specifically because of tariffs. And Leavitt's response to this was not positive.
So it was reported this morning that Amazon will soon display a little number next to the price of each product that shows how much the Trump tariffs are adding to the cost of each product. So isn't that a perfect, crystal clear demonstration that it's the American consumer and not China who is going to have to pay for these policies?
I will take this since I just got off the phone with the president about Amazon's announcement. This is a hostile and political act by Amazon. Why didn't Amazon do this when the Biden administration hiked inflation to the highest level in 40 years? And I would also add that it's not a surprise because, as Reuters recently wrote, Amazon has partnered with a Chinese propaganda arm.
You have to give Caroline Leavitt a little bit of credit because she manages to keep her cool regardless of what nonsense is coming out of her mouth. Now, first and foremost, the idea that Jeff Bezos is doing something political against Donald Trump is questionable at best. If you recall, Jeff Bezos was one of the billionaires who got a special invitation to sit right behind the president during the inauguration. Her reference to inflation under the Biden administration is a nonsense deflection. Yes, inflation was up, but inflation is not something that the Biden administration hiked up like she says. Inflation certainly went up during the Biden administration, but naturally occurring inflation is a very different thing from intentionally imposed tariffs. And then she sums up by saying she's not surprised because Amazon, according to Reuters, who, now they like Reuters because Reuters said something that helps them. Reuters reported that there was a connection between Amazon and a foreign propaganda arm, which, let's go back to the inauguration again. Are we happy to say that we had Jeff Bezos, who is, the Amazon CEO, and he was at the inauguration, even though there are ties between Amazon and a foreign propaganda source? But in the end, none of it matters because, according to all reports, President Trump called Jeff Bezos on the phone, said whatever he said to him, and Jeff Bezos did a 180, and he folded up like a cheap suit on the whole plan. So there won't be numbers on the Amazon website. At least it doesn't seem so now, indicating how much the tariffs are hiking a particular product's price. Okay, this next one, excuse me. This next one is a really interesting one. The Trump National Doral Miami, the president's golf course, is set to host the Truth Seekers Conference, featuring speakers known for promoting some rather wild conspiracy theories and unproven treatments. Now, we've already got a lot of concerns about misinformation, particularly science and medical misinformation as it relates to the Trump administration, thanks to our illustrious Health and Human Services Director, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. But I want to go through some of the list. There are almost 50 speakers set to present at this conference that's going to be held on May 1st and 2nd. And I just a few of these that I wanted to mention here. First of all, the event is hosted by Charlie Ward, and this is the Charlie Ward of the YouTube Charlie Ward Show. Charlie is a QAnon advocate. He is known for being a purveyor of COVID-19 conspiracy theories. He was a very avid 2020 election denier. And Charlie is charging just over $1,800 for a 5-star pass for this event. There are lower tiers if you're not looking to lay out the $1,800. Some of the speakers include a Dr. Sherry Tenpenny. Dr. Tenpenny is an osteopath who has turned into a vaccine specialist, more accurately described as an anti-vaxxer. There is a Dr. Brian Artis. Dr. Artis is a chiropractor who has turned into a rabid anti-vaxxer and has in the past disseminated a lot of COVID conspiracy theories. This one's interesting. Lindsey Graham, but not the Lindsey Graham that you're thinking of. This is Lindsey Graham, a woman from Arizona who is known on social media as Patriot Barbie. Ms. Graham is formerly an Arizona real estate agent. She is a pro-gun activist, an anti-trans activist, promotes herself as being a very Christian woman. She lodged her own little campaign during the pandemic against restrictions like sheltering in place and wearing masks and of course the vaccines. There is a woman by the name of Lee Dundas. She's an anti-vaxxer attorney who organized a small-scale trucker convoy back during the pandemic as an anti-vax protest. There is Patrick Byrne. Byrne is the CEO of Overstock.com, a rampant 2020 election denier and also a QAnon follower. Perhaps the most interesting one, Colette Reynolds, better known on social media and out there in cyberspace as Auntie Colette. Auntie Colette is a conspiracy theorist, and that is putting it mildly. She did an interview in Rolling Stone in 2024 and said, among other things, that CERN, and if you're not familiar with CERN, CERN is the European lab where the Large Hadron Collider is set up. She said that CERN is trying to open a portal to a demonic entity dimension. She also told a story during that interview about a group of kids at a Miami mall that apparently opened a portal that allowed 8 to 10 foot tall creatures to pass through into our dimension, I guess. Now, this final guest speaker that I'll mention is the one that raises the most concerns, at least in my mind, given the at least tangential connection to Donald Trump and his administration, and that's a gentleman by the name of Andreas Kalker. Mr. Kalker, who likes to write his name as Dr. Andreas Kalker, although I can find no evidence of him actually being a doctor in any sense. He's listed on several websites as a health researcher. Mr. Kalker's main claim to fame is that he advocates the use of chlorine dioxide. If you're not familiar with chlorine dioxide, it's bleach. He claims that the use of chlorine dioxide is nothing short of a medical marvel for removing pathogens, and has claimed that it is the best method for curing COVID-19. Now, government health authorities in both the U.S. and Spain have, denounced this treatment as fraudulent, saying that it is literally no different than ingesting small amounts of bleach. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has warned that using it can cause serious and even life-threatening side effects, including dehydration, diarrhea, and kidney injury. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. There was a webpage on the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration's website. There was a page that described chlorine dioxide as, quote, a powerful bleach typically used for industrial water treatment. And it warned that it can be life-threatening. That page has been taken down since the Trump administration has taken over. If you go to the address where that page was, it just says, page not found. Now, there's no indication in the things that I found that the president plans to make a stop at this conference or an appearance at this conference. But, the tangential connection is enough for me, especially given all of the news that the Health and Human Services Director has been making with his fringe theories on things such as autism and other diseases that he seems to believe have hidden and nefarious causes behind them, other than what established and peer-reviewed science has deemed the explanations for these ailments. And moreover, in an age where we're bombarded with so much misinformation, particularly about some of the things that are mentioned in these short bios I did, the 2020 election, vaccine safety and efficiency, and so on, it seems rather irresponsible for a president-owned resort to be hosting something billed as a truth conference that is, on its surface, as far from the truth as one could possibly be. Now, as I mentioned, there are about 47 different speakers at this conference, and I'm going to add a couple of links to the Neighbor on the Left Linktree page. One for the list of speakers at this Charlie Ward sponsored event, as well as I'll put a link to the Rolling Stone article about this Auntie Coulette person, although I will state that the Rolling Stone article is behind a paywall, so you might have to find a way around that. But the Linktree page for the Neighbor on the Left podcast can be found at linktr.ee/Neighbor on the Left. That's linktr.ee/Neighbor on the Left. And I'll have a group of links listed as links for episode 3. And you can check these out for yourself. Next up, rumors continue to swirl around about items being removed from the Smithsonian Institute under the guise of the DEI purge. And some articles have been out there. One of them mentions that a civil rights activist named Reverend Amos Brown says that he was recently notified that 2 of the artifacts that he had given to the museum would be returned to him. He described one of these items as a book authored by a Reverend George Washington Williams in 1880, and he described it as a precious and most historic book, The First History of the Negro Race. The other item was a Bible that he had taken to demonstrations with Dr. Martin Luther King and Jesse Jackson. Now, the Smithsonian, for its part, has come back and said that this has nothing to do with DEI, and that they sometimes just decide to return things to the people who gave them to the institute after the exhibition has been up for a while. There had also been a rumor that a lunch counter from Greensboro, North Carolina, where sit-ins were held to protest segregation, and that is on display at the Smithsonian, was going to be removed. And the Smithsonian has contacted news outlets to say this is not the case. So we'll hold off on that one. But the bigger issue that I wanted to talk about here is these things are being done under the heading of getting rid of DEI. Now, as it seems to me from my perspective, there are two different sides, or two different branches to this whole expulsion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The first branch is the branch that the administration talks about the most. Their false narrative that using DEI initiatives in hiring practices means that you're hiring folks who are less qualified for the jobs that they are then getting, which of course is false. Anyone who understands anything about DEI knows that the initiative is to make sure that you are getting the information about positions out to all candidates, regardless of their race or disabilities or whatever things might limit them from having access to job opportunities. The other now also that also includes a purge not only from the government, but also it's been tried to be pushed on places that receive any sort of government funding. Most prominent in the news recently has been educational entities, universities. The other branch of this DEI initiative on the administration's part is the removal of information. And there have been many stories out there. They were going to remove references to Jackie Robinson on the Naval Academy website, and we have stories now about the removal or possible removal of items from the Smithsonian that are related to ethnic or racial history. And I don't understand why it is that these things aren't talked about more separately around the media. They sort of get lumped into the same thing. It's crazy enough to say that diversity, equity, and inclusion in hiring practices or in accessibility practices is a bad thing. The administration is hell-bent on making sure that there is nothing related to DEI remaining in the government till they're done, where those things are concerned. But the purging of information, the purging of stories from websites and articles from websites and items from museums and so on, it's a totally different thing. I mean, that's not, even if you can do the mental gymnastics to make yourself believe that DEI is a bad thing, the removal of information and items from websites and museums is a totally different sort of animal, and it smacks of a very racially biased sort of informational cleansing that it disturbs the heck out of me. I'm not sure why it doesn't get more press than the other parts of the DEI expulsion initiative. This is definitely an area that bears monitoring, and I'm sure it'll be something that comes up in future episodes of this podcast. And that brings us to our last hot topic for the week. And this is just one that came to my attention because I spend entirely too much time on social media. But the issue of due process has been talked about a lot lately because of the way it seems to be being omitted in a lot of deportations in the efforts of the new administration. And one thing that I see a lot of on social media is there seem to be a lot of folks out there who keep insisting the same falsehood. And that falsehood is that due process does not apply to illegal immigrants or immigrants in general who are not citizens. There seems to be quite a number of folks out there who continue to have this misconception. It is definitely not the case. The 14th Amendment, where due process is enumerated, specifically does not say citizens. It says that right is afforded to anyone, any person who is within the jurisdiction of the United States. So it doesn't matter if it's a tourist, it doesn't matter if it's an illegal immigrant. If they are to be arrested for any reason or apprehended for any reason is maybe the better way to say it, is that they have a right to due process, which means they are read their rights, they are given access to an attorney, and they are afforded a court appearance to plead their case. Now, it should be noted that particularly on social media places like X and Threads, there has been a huge surge in bot activity. And if you're not familiar, bots on these social media platforms are automated accounts done by AI that not only make posts, but will comment on other people's posts. And they can seem very, very much real. There is information out there if you're somebody who frequents either X or Threads and you want to get better at trying to spot them, you can do a Google search, and there's some things to look out for. Some of the things include accounts with no profile picture, accounts with very cryptic names on them, and but for all intents and purposes, there are many that are very hard to identify as bots. But I just wanted to bring that up for anyone who is either still believing that due process is a citizenship right, or if you have friends and neighbors, as I do, who may be convinced that that's the case. It is definitely not the case. In fact, there's a video out there of an old interview done with former Supreme Court Justices Anton Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Now, if you know anything about those two individuals, Justice Scalia is arguably one of the most conservative justices to be on the Supreme Court in the last 100 years. And on the flip side of that, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was one of the most liberal justices. And in this interview, they are asked directly by the interviewer if the five freedoms from the Constitution are for citizens, or are they for do they cover illegal immigrants? And both justices state in no uncertain terms that the Constitution, where it enumerates this information, does not specify citizens. It specifies people who are within the jurisdiction of the United States. And I've posted that as a comment on multiple different social media posts and comments where people try to assert the opposite. I'd like to think that video in and of itself would settle the argument if a reading of the 14th Amendment doesn't already do it, but it continues to be something that gets talked about an awful lot more than it seems like it should, considering its total falsehood. All right, folks. So now it's time for our deep dive this week, and it's a deep one. So if you've ever had the nagging feeling, at least recently, that the ground underneath our democracy feels just a little bit less solid than it used to, I don't believe that you're imagining it. Today, I want to talk a little bit about the concepts of authoritarianism and fascism. These are terms that are getting mentioned a lot by the left and poo-pooed almost as much by the right. But I want to talk about what they are, how they creep in, they don't land with the bang, and why a lot of the headlines you're seeing lately are bigger red flags than they may seem. First of all, I'll tell you that my take on this is that what we're seeing has elements of both of these things. Authoritarianism is normally denoted by a number of points: erosion of democratic norms, attacks on media, a cult of personality or cults of personality, and the practice of using fear and division to accomplish its goals. I think it's hard to deny that last one, particularly fear and division. So much of the platform that the current administration and the right in general stands on these days has to do with fear and division. It's the reason why so much of a big deal is made out of things like trans athletes who make up a infinitesimal fraction of athletes in whatever arena you're talking about, whether it be high school or college or Olympics. The exaggerations in the descriptions of illegal immigrants, the way the president has talked and always talked about illegal immigrants as being hordes of murderers and rapists and gang members who pour across our border is a huge exaggeration when you look at the actual statistics. There is far, far, far less crime, particularly violent crime, where the person who is arrested and convicted is an illegal immigrant as opposed to a natural-born Caucasian citizen. But it's an easy sale to make that foreigners, especially the ones who are here illegally, are dangerous, and portraying them all as universally criminal and dangerous makes it much more palatable to do the kinds of things that the administration wants to do, the mass deportations. I don't think I would be the first one to describe a lot of the adoration for Donald Trump under the heading of cult of personality. Cult of personality, which is generally described as where an effort is made to create an idealized and heroic image of a leader. Say what you want about Donald Trump, whether you agree with his policies or don't agree with his policies. there are an awful lot of T-shirts and paraphernalia out there that you can get that have Donald Trump photoshopped as a knight on a horse, or as a giant muscular superhero, and things of that nature, which is exactly what is meant by a cult of personality. And of course, the erosion of democratic norms, the most two obvious examples would be the conspiracy theories about the 2020 election and the extreme reactions to that lost election. And now the new SAVE Act that's trying to revamp the way we register to vote under the guise of trying to make something illegal, that being non-citizen voting, that is already illegal. These might seem minor in a vacuum, but they definitely fall under the heading of erosion of democratic norms. Next, I'll talk about some of the talking points that signify fascism, and you'll see as I go through these, thinking about the ones I just mentioned for authoritarianism, why I think that what we're looking at here is a combination of the two. The well-established signs of fascism include things like powerful and continuing expressions of nationalism. It's no secret that Trump is a very nationalistic type of political leader. He talks about America first, and he pushed forth all these tariffs under the guise of America being taken advantage of by, well, virtually every country on the planet, according to President Trump. There is a disdain for the importance of human rights. This one seems painfully obvious as well. We have any number of folks out there who will tell you that illegal immigrants or immigrants in general do not have the same rights as we do, and should not have the same rights as we do, and are very obviously treated differently than the average person. There is identification of enemies or scapegoats as a unifying cause. Now, this one overlaps with the use of fear and division that I mentioned under authoritarianism, but enemies and scapegoats, there's a number of them that we can talk about. We can talk about the LGBT community. We can talk about trans individuals. We can talk about illegal immigrants. In fact, there's a lot of rhetoric on the right that included in that list of enemies are people who are liberal and progressive, the radical left, as they like to call us. There's an old quote of two politicians talking where they're both of the same party, and the one refers to the other party as the enemy, and the second person says they're not the enemy, they're just the opposition. And that's not the case anymore. And that's, both sides are guilty of that, I think, is that the opposite, people who think the opposite are deemed as not just opposition to political goals, but as enemies. Next is the avid militarism and superiority or supremacy of the military. Now, we haven't seen this one as much yet, except for the fact that we have the largest military in the world in terms of dollars spent. In fact, we spend more than I think the next 5 or 6 highest countries together. But yet, every time a budget comes around, particularly when there is a Republican in the White House, it includes major spending increases for the military. Now, we can argue, I guess, there's arguments to be made on both sides whether or not increases in military spending are necessary, but it wouldn't be ridiculous if you think that it's overkill at a certain point, no pun intended. Next on the list is rampant sexism as a component of fascism. And we're beginning to see that as well. There's a lot of talking heads out there, particularly in the religious right, who promote ideas like removing women's right to vote, and the idea that the woman should be subservient to the man, and we see things like government control over women's health issues. And again, I have to bring up the SAVE Act, the voting registration act, because as many experts have weighed in, it puts a different burden on particularly married women than it does on men, married or otherwise. The next item on the list is a controlled mass media. While mass media isn't controlled yet, you can see the hints of a desire to move in that direction from the current administration. When as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, when polls come out that the president doesn't like, he says that they're fake, and that not only are they wrong, but they're wrong on purpose. And he has a lawsuit against CBS and 60 Minutes currently. He has made comments about various different news outlets, and that they should be investigated, and not for telling bald-faced lies, but for telling or giving news stories that were unfavorable to the administration and or Donald Trump himself. And the final item I have on the list as one of the tenets of fascism is obsession with national security, which this folds into the immigration conversation, because, I mean, as it stands right now, we don't have any imminent or viable threats from other countries as far as our national security is concerned, at least in a traditional militaristic way. I would say that the idea that the current administration doesn't seem to have much of a focus on cyber threats is sort of astounding for all the other rhetoric that they have about the way countries supposedly take advantage of us. In fact, there was a news story about halfway through the first 100 days that some of the cyber experts who worked on cyber threats from Russia had been removed from their positions, which was absolutely astounding. It sort of fits in with the narrative that Trump has a soft spot in his heart for Russia and Vladimir Putin. But that notwithstanding, just on its face, the idea that we would cut down on anything cybersecurity related, particularly where Russia is concerned, seemed absolutely ludicrous. So with some of these tenets in mind, I would suggest that you start thinking about them when you are reading headlines and you see headlines that talk about restricting protests or cracking down on protests, or trying to limit education in any way, whether subtle or direct, including the dismantling of the Department of Education, the threats against universities under the heading of DEI and anti-Semitism, and stories that talk about items that can be considered fear-mongering and exaggeration. The main thing to remember about these two concepts, and we could debate whether or not one is a greater threat than the other, or if they truly are mixed or what have you. But the important thing to remember about these things is you won't wake up one day and see a headline that says, while you were asleep, fascism started, or while you were asleep, we became an authoritarian country. These things creep in. They start small. And I know everyone's sick and tired of hearing references to Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler when we talk about politics in 2025 America. And a lot of them are overblown. A lot of them are used for shock value. But One thing that I think is impossible to ignore is if you go and you read stories and accounts of how things began when the Nazis took control in Germany. Again, you're going to see a story of not a torrent, but a small drip that continued to build very slowly. It's like the old story about, if you put a frog in a pot of cold water and slowly raise the temperature of the water, the frog will never realize that it's in danger until it's too late. It's the same sort of thing where these things are concerned. It's important to be hypervigilant. If we're wrong, if the people on my side of the argument who think that we're headed in the wrong direction, that these things are a possibility that we have to be guarded against, if we're wrong, I'll be the first one to say I'm happy about it. However, the potential danger of these things increasing or coming to be, to my mind, is exponentially greater than having the conversations about them now and being aware of the signs of these things and the things that are happening that can be considered steps in the direction of fascism or authoritarianism. It's not an overnight. It's a slow normalization with distraction and fear-mongering. So what do you do? Stay informed. The people who say to me, I don't care about politics, or I don't read the news because it upsets me. I mean, I guess I get it, but they frustrate me to no end, because whatever it is they're afraid of, they will be no less susceptible to it if they are blind and deaf to what's going on. So stay informed. Speak up. I catch a lot of grief from people I know about all my social media posts, and I'm sure they're not going to be any happier with me, that those same folks, when they start listening to episodes of this podcast. But it's important not to be quiet when you hear or see something that doesn't pass the smell test. Support institutions that are under attack. And that doesn't necessarily mean monetarily, but, if there's a protest in your area at a particular college or university that's under attack, go to the protest, or at least post about the protest on your social media account so other people are aware of it. And if you're able to, donate to institutions that are under attack, whether it's things for your local schools or universities in your area, or to groups that promote these institutions and are always on the side of protecting education and people's rights. Support those things whenever you can, and I'm sure we'll be talking more about this as the days go on. We just passed the 100-day mark of the administration, which, we still have quite a ways to go. And I guess we'll see. But better to be vigilant than to be surprised. Alrighty then. That brings us to the end of another episode. Once again, my name's Don Spielis. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to what I have to say. Just by way of a little teaser, we're going to have our usual hot topics in the next episode based on what we see in the headlines. And for next episode's deep dive, we're going to talk about the concept of woke. What exactly it means to be woke and why it's such a big deal. One more mention of where to find your neighbor on the left on the internet. As I mentioned, the Linktree account, which will have all of the links, both for this episode, as well as our social media links. The Linktree address is linktr.ee/neighbor on the left. You can find Neighbor on the Left on Threads, at Neighbor on the Left, on Instagram, at Neighbor on the Left, and we're also on Facebook. That link is on the Linktree page. And if you want to contact me about the podcast, suggestions, criticisms, thoughts on anything, the email address is Neighbor OT Left Podcast, all lowercase, Neighbor OT Left Podcast @gmail.com. And of course, you could use the social media accounts to send direct messages as well. If you're listening to this podcast on your favorite podcast provider, if you wouldn't mind taking the time to leave a review, that would be great. And that wraps up this week's episode. I hope you'll be back next week. And until then, have the week you voted for.